Welcome to Bringing Back the Wild. In each episode, Mike Arnold explores how science, tradition, and hands-on conservation come together to protect the wild places and wildlife we care about. Your host, Mike Arnold, is a professor of genetics, a lifelong hunter, and a conservation biologist. As a genetics professor who spends as much time in the woods as he does in the lab, Mike studies wildlife, has a passion for hunting, and cares deeply about conservation. On this podcast, Mike dives into the science and stories behind bringing wildlife species back and keeping wild places wild. Sponsors of Bringing Back the Wild are Dallas Safari Club, conserving wildlife, engaging the public, and ensuring the future. Lifeform Taxidermy, guardian of the hunter's dreams. Zambezi Delta Safaris, protecting wildlife, empowering communities, and defining adventure. Royal Outfitters UK, tradition in the field, excellence in the hunt. Travel Express, your ticket to adventure. Africa Sky Boutique Hotel, luxury, comfort, and true African hospitality, just minutes from Johannesburg's O.R. Tambo International Airport. Now, here's your host, Mike Arnold.
Welcome back to Bringing Back the Wild. We have a very special day today because we have a repeat customer on a it's our first ever. And it is my great
Deja vu.
it is my great friend Larry, Mr. Whitetail Weishuhn. And Larry, welcome back. Thank you so much for coming and being on the show today.
What an absolutely great pleasure and honor to be back with you. I look for every opportunity where you and I can visit.
Me too, which is sometimes not good for those around us.
Don't tell them. Don't tell them. Let the mystery continue.
There you go. Keep it in the family. Larry, today you and I had talked before you headed out for two different hunts for two different kinds of what I would call whitetail deer, although they're in that group, but they're so different from what most of us chase in the woods in Georgia when I'm out, or Oklahoma or whatever. And so I'd like you to talk to us about those two hunts because I'm jealous of both of them because I've never gotten either one of these animals.
We need to correct that. Yeah, and the question is, you're right. One of them is called Odocoileus virgininianus carminensis. The other one is called Odocoileus virgininianus couesi. And the two subspecies, arguably amongst, if not the smallest of the whitetail deer. I know the key deer down in Florida are reportedly to be smaller than the carminensis deer, but they're really about the same size. Now, for the guys who live in Georgia or who listen to this almost anywhere where they're whitetail deer, when we're starting to talk about antlers, most people were they hunting unless they were strictly out trying to shoot an animal for meat, shall we say, probably not get real excited about the size of the racks that these animals have. But you got to realize that both of them are very small body size. Both live in the high mountains, if you will, of the Southwest. With the little carminensis deer, it's a very interesting deer. It's smaller than the Coues deer. It lives above 4,500 feet elevation in the mountains of West Texas and down into a little bit of, I think it's Coahuila and maybe even Nuevo Leon and maybe of the far eastern part of Chihuahua, Mexico. Again, small. And I'm talking about a mature buck, a 4-year-old, 5-year-old buck that will weigh maybe 100 pounds, sometimes a little bit larger. So
if he's soaking wet.
That's soaking wet. It really is. The interesting thing, we'll start with the carminensis because that's where I hunted first. Hunted with Steve Jones with Backcountry Outfitters. Steve and I go back a long way, and I've hunted there with Steve on this particular ranch down close to the Shinati Mountains, which are the Shinati Range, borders essentially Mexico. If you go just a little bit to the south and southwest of the Shinatis, you're going to be across the Rio Grande River into Mexico. Great ranch. And I don't want to come back to that because those animals in that area are facing some difficulties right now. Talking about little Carmen Mountain whitetails, but hunted with him in the past there, and then I've hunted him also down in the Del Carmen's just across in Mexico numerous years ago. they've always fascinated me because they're small size. Now, going back to where I first really came to know what they were, used to be a writer called Byron Dalrymple. Byron Dalrymple was a musician from Michigan who relocated in Kerrville, Texas. Every year, Byron would go out to the Cattle Gauge Ranch, which is out west of or south of Alpine and Marfa, essentially. And they would go hunt three species or two subspecies and another species of deer, that being a desert mule deer, the Texas whitetail, and then the little carminensis whitetail that lived, as I said, above 4,500 feet of elevation. That they fascinated me because he talked about their size and how difficult they were to come up with. And then as a biologist, I got to spend some time out there and started talking to a lot of the old time ranchers that lived there for a long time. And they go, "Oh yeah, you're talking about those." They know what a carminensis deer was when I asked them. And I thought, yeah, let me just ask about whitetail deer. And say, "Oh, you're talking about the fantails." I said,
Yep.
"Fantails? Yeah, absolutely. Yes, sir." The interesting thing is because of their small body size and their stature is their tail is every bit as long as a regular white-tailed deer you might find in Georgia, Michigan, Alberta, Texas. And so when they run, they throw that tail up whenever they're concerned about something. And that tail looks like the sail of an old-time sailing ship compared to the body of that animal. So that too really fascinated me, and the fact that they live only above 4,500 feet elevation. Now, over the years, I've had several different people tell me, I shot a really great carminensis deer, and I said, "Oh, fantastic! Where did it come from?" "I came from just outside of Del Rio, Texas." And I go, "Yeah, okay. I hate to tell you, but that is not a true Mountain whitetail." So absolutely fantastic species, and they're doing well across the board. But hunting was hard on this particular ranch compared to what it was in years past. But there are a few little things that kind of changed there since the last time I'd been there about 10, 12 years ago.
And what were those?
Thank you for asking. Thank you for asking. Two things primarily. One being aoudad, barber sheep, that are there in huge numbers, and American elk, which are there in great numbers. We hear a lot these days from different people, particularly the Wild Sheep Foundation, talking about how the aoudad has taken over many of the mountain ranges in West Texas, how they're passing on a type of pneumonia that is devastating on the desert bighorn. And that too is true by all means. But I think we're overlooking the fact that aoudad is so prolific, has really hardly any of all. I can't even think, maybe an occasional mountain lion or maybe a cougar or bobcat that might catch a lamb somewhere. But there are no natural enemies for them because they're such huge herds. They can convert anything into energy. I'm convinced they could eat rocks and do well. And because they're from the northern Sahara mountains or the mountains of the northern Sahara desert, a lot of those initial animals that were brought over never tasted water. What moisture they got, they essentially got from vegetation. So they have done extremely well. They're very high in terms of reproductive rates in that they do occasionally have twins, but also 28 days after parturition, they breed again. So it's just we think about the feral hog has been very productive. That aoudad the numbers have just greatly increased. When I was there several years ago, we would see maybe 10, 12 aoudad in a day. And when we were there this time, we saw I don't think I ever saw less than 300 aoudad in a day. And we were hunting different areas. It wasn't the same aoudad. We watched one herd that had well over 100 animals in it. And that didn't include the little lambs that we were seeing. So they're really competing for food, space, and water, if you will, with the little Carmen Mountain whitetail, and also the desert mule deer that's out there. There's a good herd of desert mule deer there as well, but they too are taking it on the chin. And also the elk, which a lot of people in Texas, elk are an exotic, just like the aoudad. They're considered a non-endemic animal. However, there were elk all over West Texas at one time many years ago. And what happened initially is when they created the Guadalupe National Park area just where Texas and New Mexico come together in a corner there in that area, the National Park Service, that had been a cattle ranch, so it was well watered. The elk stayed up in the mountains there, all those kind of things. When the National Park Service came in, they went in, they closed up all the non-natural water holes and probably a few of the what would have been natural springs as well too. That forced the elk farther south into Texas, into the other mountain ranges, and then they got to, oh my God, we got elk. In some instances, they were supplemented as well too from elk scattered, I guess, from New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, different areas as well too. But that elk herd, again, going back when I was there several years ago, my gosh, if you saw an elk, you go, oh my God, we saw an elk, we saw an elk. And we were seeing probably in excess of 100 head of elk every day as well too. That's a lot of mouths to feed,
Yep.
particularly when you kick in that you got rabbits and other things too, and then even some of those areas have feral hogs. Now, feral hogs may not normally compete with some of the larger wildlife, such as the deer species, until there is a dry period. And
Yep.
then next thing you know, they're trying to eat the same thing that the native game species are, or the other introduced species. So that's kind of what's happening with the little Mountain whitetail deer out there. They're not endangered to this point, but if something isn't done to try to reduce the total number of mouths on some of these properties, and some of that's being done by some of the more progressive landowners, they're realizing that, hey, this is a native species and we need to do something. And so they're going in and like the same thing for the desert bighorn going in, and we now have the ability where the landowner doesn't really have to pay for a helicopter going in and removing a bunch of aoudad. Now, in most of them, they're not trying to kill every aoudad, but they're darn sure trying to reduce the number and trying to reduce the ewe herd. Because very few people want to come out and hunt ewe aoudad, and it's a shame because it would be an absolutely fantastic hunt, regardless whether you hunt for a big ram or a ewe. But you hear a lot about aoudad being shoe leather, being a whole lot easier to chew than an aoudad. But actually, aoudad, besides some of the really old males, there's a bunch of meat that could be salvaged. So hopefully somebody will come up with a program where even if they are shot out of the helicopter, that those animals can be utilized for meat in certain ways. I've had meat from aoudad. It's got a great flavor, but it can be tough. But when you get into some of these ewes and some of the younger animals, it's really not a bad table fare when you get right down to it. So hopefully more people will become aware of that, and some of the landowners will open up and go, okay, come on in and shoot as many ewes as you want to. And hopefully, as I said, hopefully that's something that'll happen in the future.
Yeah, because they are an economic benefit to these outfitters as well, and these landowners. People like me want to go shoot an aoudad, and we pay for it. That is a good thing, but probably they're getting more money off of their Carmen Mountain whitetails than they are an aoudad.
They are, and particularly with the desert mule deer. These days, there's so much interest in mule deer. Mule deer hunting prices have really skyrocketed. And so I asked one of the ranchers that I know very well out there, and I said, tell me about your mule deer hunt. And he's got Carmen Mountain whitetails on this place too. And he said, on a really big mule deer, he said, which we're trying to grow, he said, we'll get $10,000. And I said, what about a Carmen Mountain whitetail? And he goes, oh, probably about 7,500, maybe 8,000. And I said, okay. I said, what do you get for your aoudad? And he said, we bring an outfitter in, and he said, we get like $3,000 or $4,000 for each aoudad ram that we shoot. Of course, he's kicking something on top of that. But I said, from an economic basis, wait a minute, if you have 500 aoudad on your property and you could reduce that to 100 and try to keep that number at that level or even less, you could still shoot as many aoudad as what you're probably shooting. But look at the benefits that you would have in terms of providing vegetation and forage for both the little Carmen Mountain whitetail and the mule deer. And I said, probably from an economic perspective, you would do a whole lot better than what you're doing now with the limited number of aoudad and the reduced number of mule deer and Carmen Mountain whitetails that you're taking.
And what about the elk too? Because a lot of us like to hunt elk, and also they are, like you said, they outcompete everything. And let me back up. I'm not sure they outcompete aoudad, but they outcompete mule deer. They'll push them off. They can reach higher. They can all sorts of different things, especially if times are tough. So what happens with the elk on these properties?
Some of these elk are hunted, and of course, there's several really good outfitters. Greg Simons with Wildlife Systems, and Greg leases a lot of that country. And as a biologist, tries to manage it properly for everything that's there. God bless him and the landowners he works with. But there are some unbelievably huge elk in Texas in terms of antlers. It's not uncommon to shoot 400 class elk, quite common. 300, very common. And so those are really big elk, and they are considered an exotic. So you just need the 5 or 7 day exotic license plus landowner permission. And there's a lot of interest, more and more coming. Of course, because they're considered exotic, you can't put them in Boone and Crockett or Pope and Young. And one of the reasons that they were never put really on the game list, if you will, the game animal list, is that years ago, when going back to the 1960s, when about that time frame, when Texas was trying to reestablish the desert bighorn, there was a concern that if the elk population increased to where a lot of times they would take over a water hole, so that the bighorn sheep could not water, or they would outcompete them in certain areas for food. State at that point wanted to keep them as a exotic so that they could be hunted year round, and there were not season limitations and those kind of things. And of course, all that led to a greater increase.
Yep.
But some of these places too now are starting to realize that they do have an effect on elk, not only on elk as the numbers increase because the quality seems to be going down a little bit, but also that they're competing with the native species that are there. And hopefully over a period of time, we can get more and more people involved talking about ranchers and managers and those kind of things, and taking a few more cows every year. There's a tremendous number of cows out there. When I was on the ranch that I was on with Steve Jones, we saw probably, I'm looking around, but I want to say probably about a 70% or better calf crop. The animals that we saw, I think aoudad was like 100 plus. But so you think about it, and you think about that's this year. Okay, those are going to be, they're eating right now, and they'll continue eating. So I got a feeling that as we move into the future, we're definitely going to have to try to spend more time as biologists, as hunters, as managers, as those of us who love the native species. And elk, to me, too, in a way, are native species. But we need to manage those more properly than what has been done in the last few years. And otherwise, we're going to lose a lot of things. And to me, it always comes right back down to the habitat. The habitat is so very important for everything that's there. And when you start overpopulating and destroying habitat, game populations and animal populations rebound very quickly. That old dry country out there that's thirsty all the time, it takes years for the range to recover. So again, hopefully we're through like efforts of DSC Foundation, our Texas Wildlife Association, the Desert Bighorn program that we have here in Texas, the Wild Sheep Foundation, the Mule Deer Foundation, even the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. With all those working together, hopefully we can bring everybody together. Of course, Texas Wildlife figures very tightly into all that because it's a landowner-based organization. So we get this information out, hopefully more and more people will start practicing a little bit better harvest programs, shall we say, on some of the very prolific animals that are out there.
Well, I'm hoping to get an invite from somebody to come out and shoot a 400 class elk. I don't care if it can't go into Boone and Crockett. It's still going to look pretty on the wall, and they eat really good.
Do they ever? And do the cows. I got invited earlier this year, and unfortunately, the invite came during the time frame when I was on this other hunt that we're going to talk about a little bit. But so I couldn't go. But hunting those little Carmen Mountain whitetails, I think SCI may have a category for them if somebody's interested in the record book. A really good one will Ron Spomer, bless his heart, and it's the oh bless his heart that your mom and I would probably use. Ron shot with I think a buck. I can't remember the score, but he was hunting with Steve Jones. And it was a long hunt. They spotted this deer from a distance. They sat up. The deer disappeared. They sat there for 5 or 6 hours waiting for this deer to get up. Ron actually made Steve Jones go back to the truck and get him a sandwich. The buck finally gets up. He shoots it. The buck's got drop tines, all these kind of things. And as best as I recall, it scored somewhere in the 130s or 140s. And a really big, normal carminensis deer will probably score about the same or less than what a really good. So we're talking about that 85 to 100 point type of things. They do get 8 and 10 points. A lot of the mature bucks tend to be 8 points. There are a few 10-point bucks. I've seen 1 or 2 that had kicker points and those kind of things and a little drop time. But a really good antler-wise carminensis deer, again, is going to be that 85 to 100 points.
And I know, see, because I'm a weird biologist that worked on hybridization for so many darn years and everything from insects to bats to whitetail and mule deer, I always wonder, because see, I like hybrids, but I always think about it and I ask people over in Africa, do you think the sable is really a Roosevelt plus and no, it's not. It's a common or no, it's a Roosevelt sable.
Many years ago, obviously, at this point, and we were down on the Yearwood Ranch in the Shinatis, overlooking I crawled all the way to the top. Now, some of that country's got blind canyons in it that are populated with unbelievable type of vegetation, oak trees that you very seldom see anywhere else, all kinds of different browse species. And we were hunting, that particular ranch had carminensis way up high, had mule deer from the flats to the foothills, and then the whitetails were at the bottom end of the foothills. And there was an obvious difference when you saw those deer. You could tell, of course, mule deer, but the texanensis subspecies and the carminensis subspecies, there was probably about 4 inches size difference between the two.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm sure there was some interbreeding, but it was almost like in Africa where those animals eat. Some of them eat at the top, some of them eat at the middle, some of them eat at the bottom, some of them eat on the ground.
Yep.
You had that same kind of effect with those particular 3 subspecies of deer out there. But no doubt that there's crossbreeding, because in that country I have seen crossbreds primarily between mule deer does and generally bred by a whitetail buck that are very interesting. We need to visit about those sometime, because the reason I think we don't see very many of them, because it looks like a mule deer stops where he bounces up and then whitetail runs in the full gait. And some of those offsprings that I've seen that were crossbreeds were awkward. They didn't know whether to start or run or what to do. And I think very often because of that, they fell prey very easily to bobcats and coyotes, and probably out some of that far west Texas, even golden eagles, where there's a fair number of those as well too.
Probably they look a lot like when I try to dance. When your African adventure starts or ends in Johannesburg, stay at Africa Sky Boutique Hotel, just 10 kilometers from OR Tambo International Airport. Africa Sky welcomes safari guests, professional hunters, and travelers with warm African hospitality and stylish luxury rooms. Enjoy unforgettable breakfasts and candlelit dinners paired with exceptional wines. Traveling with firearms? Africa Sky prearranges your rifle permits and meets you at arrivals to handle every detail. Comfort, convenience, and personal service. Africa Sky delivers every time. Let's switch gears slightly. Tell us about your Coues deer hunt. Boy, I tell you what, like I say, jealous, but that's okay. I'll get over it.
We need to get you on a little Coues deer. Now, it depending on where you are, they're either pronounced as Coues or Cows, and it's Coues, and they were named after Dr. Elliot Coues, who was a physician with Crook, as I recall, and they were chasing Geronimo. He made the first description of those out in Arizona and probably right into Mexico. They too are a relatively small species of whitetail deer in terms of antlers and in terms of body. The ones that I've shot, and I've been fortunate, I've hunted them in Sonora, in Chihuahua, and now in Durango, and come back to that in just a little bit. But every one of them that I've shot probably has weighed in the neighborhood of maybe 100, 110 on a really good fed deer, meaning, and they're just natural browse, natural range, but where they had acorns and those kind of things and fattened up. So they're not a very big deer. Their tail looks like a regular whitetail, although there's color differences between on the top side, talking about when the tail is down between it and the carminensis and the couesi and also the regular whitetail deer. But the interesting thing about the Coues deer is you can always tell whether it's a Coues deer, because a whitetail, when he runs, he's flagging up here high. When a Coues deer runs, that tail is parallel to his top of his back.
I'll
and
be
he
doing.
flags like this. One of the easiest way to tell the difference between the two of them is if you happen to have both of them together with just how they hold that tail, and of course the size as well too. The Coues deer is found primarily in the States. It's found partially out in the Gila country of New Mexico and that kind of into that boot hill of New Mexico, probably the lower quarter or so of that much of Arizona, and then over into Sonora and Chihuahua, and probably over to the edge of Coahuila, and then down the mountain range where we were hunting of the Sierra Madres. We were hunting at the very end of the Sierra Madres down in Durango, which is down below Monterey, almost due south of a long way of Dallas, Texas, if you will. That's where we fly out of. But the country where we hunted there, as opposed to in Sonora and the areas where I've hunted out west you have the big saguaro cactus, the barrel cactus, very few trees outside of mesquite, and then maybe some ebony and some things like that. Whereas down in where we were hunting down in Durango, we were hunting at 8,500 to 9,000 feet elevation up in the mountains. And the vegetation was probably, as I recall, probably about 8 or 9 different species of oak that I could distinguish the difference between. Pine trees, 3 or 4 different types of pine trees, piñons, cedar, a little bit of cactus, a fair amount of agave, which was interesting, and then just a myriad of other types of vegetation. Totally different than hunting in the Sonora area. I got tickled. We had sold a hunt through the DSC Foundation last year in July, and Chris Clark bought the hunt. Chris is from around Houston area. So he'd hunted Coues deer in Sonora numerous times. When he flew down to hunt down there, he goes, "My God, where are we? This is not Coues." The first day we went out, he goes, "Normally in Sonora," he said, "I've seen 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 deer." And he said, and driving around, this was the first afternoon he got there, he said, "We've seen 3 or 4." And I said, "These deer are a little bit different. They're a little bit different type of terrain, a little bit different type of habitat." And later, when they started seriously hunting in the hunt, you got to get out and walk and cover a bunch of country. And the little Coues deer, regardless where he lives, it doesn't make a difference whether it's in New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, any of the Mexican kind of provinces or states, they hide in plain sight. They have the ability to lay down, stand there, and you'll sit there with binoculars and look, and you can't see them. You don't see a deer, and then the sun changes a little bit direction, or the deer just happens to twitch an ear, or you bent off the antler, or the black of his nose, or a twitch of a tail, and that deer's been standing there for the last 5 minutes looking at you, and he's not but 200-300 yards away, and you're going, "Where was he?" He was there the entire time, kind of thing.
Yep.
A lot of places back in the days of Jack O'Connor, that's where my interest started with Coues deer. They were called the gray ghosts of the desert, and they truly can be and are. But hunting down the Chihuahua, as opposed to Chihuahua or Sonora, it's it's kind of like hunting mule deer in the foothills to the high country here in the States.
I'm wondering, in terms of their breadth of habitats they can live in, isn't it amazing? Because if you think about it, what are they feeding off of there? It sounds like a real rich place, so don't get me wrong for an herbivore, but in those cases, are they feeding off of acorns and seeds, pinyon, all of this stuff? Whereas another area, what the heck are they? But they're able to do it. They're adapted to a very broad range if they're in dry. And by the way, yes, it is a long drive from Dallas to Durango, but I can guarantee you it's a longer drive from Lubbock, Texas, because I went on field trips down into that area and they didn't bother letting us fly. They just sent all of us grad students and undergrads in a big old car and told us head south.
Yeah.
But down in that area, it's a gorgeous area, gorgeous area. I love Durango from a biological perspective, but I'm thinking Durango versus Chihuahua, or Durango versus Arizona, or boy, that's a broad landscape difference.
It truly is. It is black and white difference in terms of vegetation when you get right down to it. This particular property that we're on, the El Durangueno Ranch, it's almost 60,000 acres, and it's well watered. They were there. They had rain. Now their rainy season is generally in the early fall, but while we're there, we had a fair amount of water come falling out of the sky, much to my chagrined because I didn't carry a raincoat with me because I never expected it to rain down there, but it did. But it's very well watered. But what I tend to do is when we take an animal in an area that I'm not familiar with, I'll open that rumen up and I want to see what that deer is eating. And even though I may not be able to identify saying that's such and such a plant, such and such a plant kind of thing, I'll look at the shape and the size and the texture and all that kind of stuff of a leaf. And then when we're out looking around and hunting, I'm looking for those kind of bushes and trees because that tells me that those animals, I know now what those animals are eating. Can I identify it? No, but I know that if that animal's been eating that and I can find those kind of types of vegetation, it's going to be a pretty good chance I'm going to find deer in those areas.
And what a great idea, because I too tend to open things up and people look at me weird. You don't want to perforate that. I'm
Let them
like,
look at it
I'm
for
getting
it
it
up
away
there.
from the animal before I'm doing it. But in Scotland recently is good, another good example. They did
Yes.
exactly the same thing on my red stag, Sika deer, and the roebuck. They wanted to know where the animals were spending their eating time, because
Yes.
that's probably going to be a time where you can actually hunt them more easily than obviously if they're in bed. Now, tell us about the hunt for your Coues deer, because boy, I tell you, that photo sure that was a pretty buck.
I was very fortunate in years past. I shot an absolute monstrous coon deer in a non-typical Boone Crockett buck in Sonoran. So my goal was to try to shoot something that would come close to Boone Crockett. And so doing, I looked at a lot of deer, a lot of bucks, and we were there at a time frame. This being like the third week of January. Those bucks were just seriously starting to chase does, just really starting moving. And every day that we were out, we saw more bucks and bucks that even the guides who spent a lot of time on the property looking for deer, trying to find out where they are, than they had been seeing. So I had passed up, I lost count of the number of bucks that I passed up. Beautiful little 8 points, maybe one little 9 point here and there kind of thing. Bucks that had I not shot Coues deer in the past, I would have probably taken. But I kept looking and we spent a lot of time walking to points and then sitting, still hunting as we went, sit there and glass for hours and hours, and then still hunt to another area and do the same thing. And the buck ended up shooting. We had probably seen the second day at about 1,000 yards or better. And so the guide, who speaks very little English, his name is Zordo, which is essentially lefty for in their language. I hunted with him last year. Great individual, very great eyes. Oh, can't say enough good things about him. And I, through sign language, toward about the tail end of the hunt, he goes, "Let's go back to where we saw that big buck." So we drove for about an hour and a half to get where we're going. Got there at daylight. Crawled about, let me, he walking, me crawling almost hand over hand to where we could sit and glass. And we're sitting there and glassing. And right after really good first light, the sun had just come up. We spotted this buck that I ended up taking at about 500 yards.
Hmm.
And the rifle I was shooting was a Mossberg 7mm PRC. I was using precision hunter load, and this 175 grain ELDX, unbelievably accurate in that little 20-inch Mossberg barrel. Of course, it's topped with a stealth vision scope that can be, so I can change the turret, and I know exactly where it shot at different ranges. And unfortunately, this animal would not stop unless he was behind a bush or a series of trees to where there was no opportunity for a shot. He disappeared, and we're sit there, and look, another little buck came by, not quite as big as the first one, and sitting there probably about 45 minutes later, and I look down into on the slope again at about 500-600 yards away, and here's this buck that we'd seen earlier just running downhill, and I'm going, "Where's he going?" Because then it dropped off, and I thought he's going to go down into that canyon. We're never going to see him again, and we sat there a little bit longer, and then Zordo said, he said, "Show me where you saw this deer." And I pointed out, and he said, he motioned, he said, "Let's go back to the vehicle." So as we're getting in, because the roads are so bumpy, and I would do it anyway, I removed the cartridge out of the chamber, and just to be on it for safety's sake.
Sure.
And so we get in the vehicle, we drive almost a half a mile, I guess, by the time we get to where I had seen this buck disappear over this ridge, and I could tell where it was because there was one huge pine tree there. And I said, "It was right here. The deer, I saw him run right through here." And he goes, we drive past over the top of this little knoll, and here's this buck chasing the doe like crazy. He's out there about 300 yards chasing the doe. I see it. He's looking the other direction. I said, "Stop, Alto, stop, Alto, stop." He stops. I jump out, run to a tree to get a good solid rest because I didn't have a camera with me, so I could shoot a running deer if I needed to.
Yeah.
And I've shot a lot of running deer in years. Thank God the deer's out there just shy of 300 yards. He stops. Man, I've got a good solid rest, get a little bit more of a brace against the tree, click the safety forward, pull the trigger, and it goes click.
Don't worry about this. We'll delete the click. We got to leave that on the cutting room floor.
Oh,
No
okay.
outdoor writer with your standing and hunter would ever do something like that.
Well, let's review the safety factor of it. And of course, I'd go, "Oh my God, what have I done? This deer's probably going to start running." And I'd work the boat very quickly, and the deer had just started walking. And by then, Jordan was behind me, and I shoot, and I lose because of how I'm braced. I lose sight of him in the scope, and so all I hear is the shot, and I thought, "Oh my God, hopefully I hit. Maybe I really did hit him because the crosshairs and everything looked good when I pulled the trigger." And so he's down there about 300 yards somewhere, and right on the cusp of where he drops off in the canyon. And I hand Jordan my rifle. I said, "Jordan, please, por favor, muerto." If you run.
Yes.
So I hand him my rifle, and he puts another checks to make sure there's a round in it. And the terrain is not really that steep, but it's rather boulder filled. The grass is knee high, and you can't really see where you put your foot going down there because of all the good range conditions that they had. So he's out there about 40 or 50 yards ahead of me, and I'm slowly walking my way down the hill. And I get to where almost to the cusp, and he stops, and I just kind of he's looking away, and he's just shaking his head. And I thought, "Oh my God, what's going on?" He's either stopped because the deer ran off, or he stopped because the deer's laying right in front of him. So I get there a little bit closer, and I get a little closer. "Oh, he ran off." I go, "Oh God, I missed my chance. I can't think crosshairs look good. I know the shot had to be good." And again, he does the same thing, and he sees my face going, "Oh my gosh." I'm sure my jaw dropped down. About tears have come to my eye, and about that time he bursts out laughing. The deer is about 10 feet in front of him to where I can't see it. And he starts laughing. He goes, "Keith," walk up there, and I've shot never as many coues deer as I've wanted to, but I've shot 4 or 5 of them and hunted a decent amount. And as I walk up, this deer looks like a Texas hill country rack, which means that it's going to be approaching that 115 to 120 kind of size, an 8-point about. As I get a little closer, I pick the antlers up after thanking the good Lord for having actually made the shot and that the deer didn't have to suffer, and he's laying right there. And as I look down, he is a really nice 8-point. We'll send pictures that you can run if you kind of thing. And he's got about a 14.5-inch inside spread. He's about 16 inches outside. And he would have easily made Boone and Crockett as an 8-point were not about 7 inches of main beam broken off on one side, just in front of the G2.
Yep. Hey, it's the rut. He'd been fussing with somebody.
He had been fussing with somebody, but that just kind of adds to the character of that particular hunt. And there's no doubt he would have been a Boone and Crockett as typical, as far as I'm concerned. I love Boone and Crockett. I'm a professional member. I support everything they do, but I've got a few just a small number of heads in the Boone and Crockett record book, and frankly, it was to honor that animal. I really don't care whether my name was associated to put in the book at all. It's that animal deserves that recognition, and had this buck been intact with his antlers, that's the way I felt. I'd felt the same way about him.
And the thing about it is, too, look at what it means about the property we're on, because like you said, we're not seeing quite as many Coues deer, probably because the darn vegetation's thicker. They're probably there, but when you see them, by the sounds of it, you passed up a lot that I would not have passed up. As a virgin Coues deer hunter, there's no way I'll pass up something that looks really nice. And isn't it wonderful to think about the conservation efforts that these guys are going through? Like you said, it's a ongoing active cattle ranch with all of these game species and all of the vegetation and everything being taken care of. And that's pretty special.
It really is. And I've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time now with Alonzo, late night talks, campfire talks, and on the phone and all that kind of thing. His primary concern in everything is walleye. The cattle are actually being used for the benefit of the walleye because their grass production there is really high. And I need to also add that country years ago had elk.
Mhm.
And so he, Alonzo, his brother, and I think his dad was still alive at that point, they went to the Hickory Apache reservation in northern New Mexico and won over, I can't remember, maybe the San Carlos over in Arizona, and bought elk and repopulated that area with elk to where now they have a very decent elk herd in that area, that particular area of the mountains. They're probably somewhere between 400 to 500 head of elk, and they too hunt elk. It was a native game species. They brought them back, and they hunt a limited number of bulls each year. And again, those bulls too are like 400 class bulls. And so anything that they do, Gould turkeys, probably one of the premier Gould turkey hunting properties on earth. That's
Mm.
actually how they started their hunting programs, is with Gould turkeys, of letting hunters come in to hunt Gould turkey, and they saw the Coues deer and they go, "Oh my God, we want to come back and hunt Coues deer," which led to the Coues deer program. And in the meantime, they'd done the elk, so that as well too. That particular property is managed more for wildlife than anything else. Another kicker in the deal is that Alonzo and his brother, they set up a series of cabins, a series of dormitories, and every year they bring in upwards of 400 kids from
Mm.
cities to bring them onto the ranch to show them what
Wow.
ranch life is like. They make them gather their own food for a couple of days, which includes a lot of ponds where they can fish, but they
Wow.
also teach them how to trap squirrels and rabbits and several other things, and they show them how to prepare it. Some of those are paid. Some of those, if they go to the throughout Mexico, go through the rural schools,
Mm.
and the top scholastic kids, two top scholastic kids of the year, get to come and participate in this week-long program or 10-day long program. And then also what they do is they go into the cities to where and find kids that are essentially orphaned that
Mm.
have nothing. They depend upon whatever garbage they can pull out of somebody's garbage can,
Mm.
and a lot of them show up without hardly any, with tattered clothes and no shoes
Mm.
and those kind of things. And Alonzo and his brother, through their businesses that they've created over the years past and the monies that they make, particularly from the monies from the ranch, from the hunting program, they provide do all kinds of things for these very underprivileged kids, and including trying to find a home for them somewhere down the way, hoping that they can be adopted into a family. I can't say enough good things about the Senor Alonzo
That's
for
big.
what all they do, not just for wildlife. And he and I talked a lot about the future. And I did a podcast very recently with him when I was down there and
Mm.
for my DSC's campfires. And one of the things we talked about was the future. And I was able to tie all these things that he's done with these kids. Not only is there the future of the wildlife in terms of that property and what they're doing and how they're handling their hunting program and their overall management program, but by bringing these kids in, these kids are getting an understanding how important habitat is to animals, how hunting plays into these things, all those kind of things. So the future is he's looking toward the future not only from the wildlife and habitat perspective, but also from the perspective of the human population that lives there.
And it really sounds like a DSC, a Dallas Safari Club kind of a support program and a Roland Ward, because I have written about Roland Ward both in Cameroon, their projects there in British Columbia, their projects there. And I think we need, these folks need to be aware of it too. I'm sure Dallas is because of you.
They are now. I had a very long talk with Alonzo about the DSC Foundation, and he has graciously donated that hunt that Chris Clark was on, and he has graciously donated another hunt
Mm.
for this coming 2026 fundraiser gala that we have July 23, 24, and 25, I think, at the Gaylord
Mm.
Texan there in Grapevine. And of course, if somebody can't attend, and we want them to attend, they can go online with online hunting and go under the appropriate thing there. But yeah, we talked about that. I told Alonzo, particularly on the school thing, since conservation and education play very importantly, both for DSC and the DSC Foundation, that he definitely needs to put in a proposal for a grant to the DSC Foundation with the work that they're doing down there. And I signed him up in the past as a professional member of DSC, but he's a very unique individual in so many different ways. And again, I can't say enough good things about him and his operation, and his brother. Obviously, I don't know his brother, but his brother and his entire family are very supportive of what they do on the ranch for wildlife conservation and education.
Larry, I'm going to let you go. I'm going to let you get back to whatever you have to do now today. You've been very nice as my first repeat client. This is pretty darn good now.
I am so honored to be with you, and I can't wait to spend a little bit more time around the real campfire here for too very long.
There you go. Let's go hunt again.
You got it.
Thanks for listening to Bringing Back the Wild. For more stories from the field, conservation-driven articles, and Mike's books, visit MikeArnoldOutdoors.com. Until next time, keep bringing back the wild.